Okay, so explain the CNN poll, okay? Because the CNN poll, everything seemed to be kind of going one way, where it was tightening and it was getting a little bit closer. And Trump was tying it up in each state, if not taking a lead. But that was good for him because he'd been down 3 or down 1. So to be down 3 and then up 1 or down 3 and then tied was good. And then comes this CNN poll. And I realize life does not revolve around CNN, but the CNN poll did drop, and it's got a big lead in there for Harris in Michigan and in Wisconsin, like +5 in each state. Do you believe it?
Well, Megyn, a poll is a range of scores. And so when we put out a poll result of, let's say, Trump up by 1 point, that range could be Trump winning by 4 or Trump losing by 2. So when you see a poll that has, let's say, Harris up by 5 points in Wisconsin, that poll still indicates that, yes, Harris could win by 5, she could win by 11, but she could also lose by a point. So to me, that type of number is really on the outside, the fringe end of what you'd expect. In 2020 in Wisconsin, the polling generally had Biden up around 6 points, and he won that state by less than 1 point. Michigan had a similar type of polling error. And this is not just CNN, but generally across the polls, underreporting the Trump vote. So, yeah, when you take a look at some of these polls, they seem a little as an outlier in the fact that, like Michigan or Wisconsin's been a 1 point race back in 2016. It was a 1 point race in 2020. Do we really think it's going to bounce 5 or 6 points in a direction when it's been so locked in? And then if you jump over to Michigan, do you think Michigan is closer or further away for the Democrats than they were in 2020 when Biden wins by just over 2 points? This would suggest that Harris is doing better than Biden, when a lot of the other polling, particularly the national polling, is also showing the race tightening closer to 2016 numbers than compared to 2020.
Okay, so having dealt with CNN, which you seem to be suggesting may be a bit of an outlier, take it with a grain of salt. And they haven't been doing a ton of polling. Like I think their last poll was a couple of months ago. So I don't know if they have their finger on the pulse or what's happening there. But having dealt with that, zoom out and tell us where you think this race stands.
Well, yeah, if we take a look at like the big picture, remember where we were in July and August, where Trump takes this big lead when Biden is faltering, and then Harris jumps into the race. And then she appeared to take a big lead of 4 or 5 points nationally. But what we've seen really since that first debate, even a little bit before that debate, is a slow melt of that support for Harris. And what it looks like coming into the election is there's some momentum for Trump as we enter election day in some of these states. And remember, he doesn't need to win all of the swing states just to get to the 270 mark. And when you do look at that polling as a whole, for example, Pennsylvania, we don't see many polls having Harris leading in Pennsylvania. You see polls that are tied or they're slightly leading towards Trump. Pennsylvania is a key state for the Democrats. If they lose Pennsylvania, really difficult road to 270 for Harris. So that's a number that, as you take a look at, it looks like Pennsylvania should go towards Trump, and that would suggest he would have some success on election night. But if Pennsylvania does flip and stays with Harris, that opens up some other pathways that we've been seeing. But the general take is that Harris is doing slightly worse than Biden in 2020. And the question is it worse enough for Trump to be able to overtake her in states like Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, all within a point? You know, those are all states that ended up within a percentage point. The other states that are a little bit further away would be Pennsylvania and Michigan, but those are also very competitive. Most of them have it tied or within a point on either side.
Okay, let's talk about possible paths, because as I was looking at the numbers today, and you can just Google those interactive maps and start clicking on what if she wins these states, what if he wins those states. Because I compared the possible paths to the latest battleground averages, taking the Real Clear Politics and 538 averages of all polls. And for example, I looked at Georgia. RCP average has Trump up 2.4, 538 has Trump up 1.8 in the average of all polls. The latest Emerson poll, which was earlier in October, showed Trump up 1. So it looks tight, but it looks somewhat comfortable given the comparison states for Trump. Agree or disagree?
I would agree. Even with our poll at 1 point, the previous poll was at 3 points. And so we were seeing some movement in Georgia, but I think Georgia is a pretty strong state for Trump. He seems to be getting along with Governor Kemp fairly well at this time. And those numbers are around, I think, what you mentioned on the aggregate, around 2 to 3 points, which, remember, Trump does better in 2016 when he wins the state, and then Biden barely takes it in 2020. Maybe it falls in between those two numbers, but it seems to be leaning towards Trump at this time.
Just the makeup with Kemp should be worth 11,000 votes, you would think. We did see his numbers shift almost immediately after those two patched things up. Okay, North Carolina. There was a report earlier this week. I don't know how much stock to put in it, frankly, because it hasn't been everywhere, and the polls still show North Carolina tight. But there was a report by the Carolina Journal that she had pulled some $2 million worth of her advertising from North Carolina. And she had made like a $2.3 or $4 million ad buy, and she pulled almost all of it out. And it's not because she's running away with North Carolina. It's not like she's up 10. This is looking more like Minnesota, so why spend the money there? But it being as tight as it appears to be in the polls, you also wonder why she would throw in the towel there, given that her campaign is rich. They have a lot of money. So I don't know what's happening in North Carolina. It's strange to me that she'd pull the ads given what I see in the polls, but maybe you can help me. RCP average has Trump up 1. 538 has Trump up 1.1. The Emerson poll, your group in late October, showed Trump up 2.
Yes. And so North Carolina is one of those states that Harris is trying to win back from the Republicans. So it's always trying to win, a game on the other team's home field. And North Carolina would be a Republican home field, like Georgia is a Democratic home field, where they're trying to hold those electoral votes that Biden won, and the Republicans are trying to take that back. But North Carolina's, I always thought, was a bit of a stretch for the Harris team. This is a state that Trump won in 2016 and in 2020. It's been a state that has been pretty solid. Remember, it goes for Obama in 2008 and then switches back to Romney in 2012. So North Carolina historically would be a hard state for Harris to try to break through on. I know that the Democrats were a little bullish with Mark Robinson, the lieutenant governor gubernatorial candidate for the Republicans, showing a weak campaign against Stein, thinking that there might be some reverse coattails. But we're not necessarily seeing that in our numbers. It looks pretty, even though 2 points isn't a huge, it's still within the polls margin of error, but it's a big number to overcome for the Democrats. And I think that's maybe why she pulled some of that ad buy out of North Carolina, because if Stein is still only at 12, 13-point lead in that gubernatorial race, that might not be enough to pull her over the top. And in fact, we see much more ticket splitting when we see folks going on the Trump side, willing to balance their ticket that way. So I don't know if it's going to help Harris in that regard in North Carolina.
I mean, I can see a real MAGA voter in North Carolina being like, the lieutenant governor is a hot mess. I don't believe his denials on all of his weird scandal, but I love Trump. I'm not going to make Trump pay for this guy's scandal. So I guess, we'll
Megyn,
see.
To your point,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, he's been down. Robinson's been down by double digits for months, and it hasn't impacted the top of the race. As you mentioned, those polls have it, tied or 1 point. It's probably leaning to Trump by about 1 to 2 points, but that's going to be a lot to overcome considering the situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's go. We did Georgia, we did North Carolina. Let's talk about Arizona. RCP has Trump up 2.5, 538. Again, this is the average of all polls, and they curate the polls. They don't take any poll in these averages. They only include the top-notch pollsters with a proven record, like Emerson and others. Okay, so 538 has 2.2, so up 2.5, up 2.2 in the averages. Emerson had Trump up 2 in early October. What do you think's happening in Arizona?
Arizona, as a border state, is a little different than these other states we've talked about because immigration is their top issue. So when we talk about these swing states, it's generally the economy is the top issue at around 40%, but in immigration, it drops down to about 30%, and immigration is at 30%. And then what's also interesting in Arizona, which is different than these other swing states, where females are voting for Harris and males are voting for Trump, in Arizona, both males and females are breaking for Trump. Not by the same propensity like we're seeing of males in other states, but both genders are breaking, which is unusual considering there has been a gender divide in this race. But in Arizona, it's unique. I think the immigration issue, it separates it from the other swing states. And that's been a state that Trump has been leading for a while. The Senate race there is different, where Gallego seems to have a small but steady lead over Lake, pretty consistent. So there, again, the ticket splitting is what we're seeing, where they'll go with Trump. Even though they went with Biden last time, this is a state where Trump could try to win back those 11 electoral votes.
Wow. I mean, Arizona's gone more and more blue lately. They've got this Democrat governor. They've got Democrat senators. So is Arizona still a red state, would you say? I mean, I realize it's one of the swing states, but is it in its nature, do you think it's more red than blue?
Well, I think the issues are more red, but I think the voters are more purple, and they're willing to vote across aisle lines. They're not, locked in with one of the parties we may have seen in the past. I don't think it's Barry Goldwater country exactly what, was back in the day. But yeah, there's an inkling based on the issues, particularly on the immigration side, to try to get that resolved and solved. And so those line up better with Republican candidates. But as you mentioned, the Democrats do have, they were able to take both Senate races and the governor's race. So Arizona's definitely been open to the Democratic approach, but they've also rejected too far of a progressive Democrat. And that's what makes the Gallego race really interesting, that he's been able to hold on to that lead, even though he's a little bit more progressive than where Arizona tends to be.
Am I Racist is the Daily Wire's box office hit comedy, and it's the #1 grossing documentary of the decade. Good news is it's now available to stream exclusively on Daily Wire Plus. From the same team that brought you the cultural phenomenon, What is a Woman?, comes their next big question. Am I racist? In this hilarious and revealing film, Matt Walsh goes deep undercover, infiltrating the bizarre world, truly, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's so good. You've got to see it. He gets the most powerful figures in the race-hustling establishment to say all the quiet parts out loud, exposing the absurdity of modern corporate and institutional diversity practices. And now you can witness the collapse of DEI from the comfort of your own couch. But here's the catch. You can only watch Am I Racist with a Daily Wire Plus membership. So don't miss out. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe and use code DEI to get 35% off your new annual membership. That's dailywire.com/subscribe, and be sure to use the code DEI, love that, for 35% off your subscription. Am I Racist is streaming now exclusively on Daily Wire Plus. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.